Let's head back down to the Battery now. If you heard the show yesterday, you heard Battery resident Chris Brooks talking about Jack Wells Wharf, a wharf that Mr. Brooks pointed out is the last of its kind in the Battery. It was battered by waves this past winter, as you probably know, and repaired this summer by Jack's neighbors. But the city of St. John's says the wharf has to go because it was rebuilt without a permit. Yesterday, you and I heard, for I was listening at home, that city crews were expected to show up this morning to tear that wharf down. To find out what happened, we've reached Judy Adler. She lives in the Battery, and she's on the line. Judy, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I kind of wish some members of the city council would get that message from the Supreme. Stop in the name of love, and please think what you're doing.
Did they send crews down this morning? What happened?
Yes, this morning they didn't send city workers in a city truck, but they seem to have privately contracted with somebody else. So a couple of workers, guys trying to make a living. It's not their fault what they have to do. But a couple of workers came down in the morning, and when they saw that the residents had gathered around the waterfront and that there were CBC and media crews here, they didn't seem to want to dismantle, the last remaining wharf in the Battery under the eyes of the media. So they turned around and left. Then they came back a few hours later, and again they saw the media crews there, turned around and left again, and we saw them up at Fort Waldegrave looking down on the scene, I guess trying to see, when they could dare come back. And then they came back a third time, and at that point, two women in the Battery sat on the wharf and really, made it clear that they didn't want to move, and so these guys left and gave us to believe that they'd be back tomorrow morning. They're just trying to do a job, but I think that the city is behaving with remarkable contempt for a Newfoundland heritage and the city history. We're just remarkable.
We'll get to that in a second, but no one from the city, no green trucks, no councilors, no
the mayor has never been down here ever since the storm. Not once. We've never had a meeting with him, and no green trucks came down, and no city employees came down. As I understand it, the city has subcontracted this job of tearing down the last wharf in the Battery to some company.
What do you make of the city's argument that this was a rebuild without a permit? If I build something in my backyard, I'm supposed to have a permit. I guess Jack Wells is supposed to have one too.
Yeah, well, this isn't anybody's backyard. This is an absolutely classic, last remaining Newfoundland heritage, and every spring of the year, the men down here put out these wharves so that they could put their dories in the water. And they weren't meant to be permanent structures. They were taken in the fall, and they were repaired year after year after year. And the situation in the Battery now is that we've got one last dory in the water. We've got one last wharf that was rebuilt and repaired. We've got one store that hasn't been allowed to be repaired because the city has forbidden to have it repaired, and we got some of the last retired fishermen in St. John's.
But regardless of that, let me play the devil's advocate, Judy. I know the people from the city say they're worried about public safety because if you build the wharf and they don't know that it's up to code, then that's possibly exposing people to danger. And so the wharf has to be built like all the other structures in the city of St. John's to a code.
Well, the city has never been able to help us with any rebuilding whatsoever. They've shown no interest in helping us with any rebuilding. And there is a no trespassing sign right on that wharf, and tourists don't go out there. And we've always had people in the Battery sort of watching out that tourists aren't climbing around other structures. What's really striking to me is that there are some old stores that have completely fallen down that nobody's using, and what is evident is that the city is watching and moving on any effort to repair. In other words, their priorities don't seem to be to take down the eyesores. Their priorities were immediately to tell Jack Wells, when he got his old buddies together right after the storm, as has happened in this area for 100 years, to repair his store. The city forbade him to go ahead with the repairs. And again, when there was a repaired wharf going out, a traditional landscape, one of the first things the ships see when they come into St. John's, the city was right on that So there's a way in which the city is making a slum here.
But why?
They're preventing people from repairing properties in the traditional way with the traditional skills that have been used for over a century.
Why would they do that, do you think? This is, as you have contended, and others, that, and it doesn't even need to be contended, this is an iconic part of the city.
Mm-hmm.
It shows up in ads all the time.
Right.
I heard Chris Brooks yesterday talk about the fact, I think it was in some Juno program, the Outer Battery. So why would the city not want it to look that quaint on steroids? I mean that in a good way, quaint on steroids way that it does.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's any such thing as the city. There are different people in different offices signing letters, trying to protect themselves. I can't answer your question. It may be simple lack of imagination and lack of wisdom, lack of respect. If one were to look at the worst case scenario, perhaps some people have other aspirations, for a piece of property, and think the sooner it's cleared out, the better. But I try not to be paranoid. I think perhaps it's lack of thought, lack of imagination, but definitely lack of respect. That's what kind of amazes me, the lack of respect. What
happens now? Do you guys stay on high alert?
Well, what happens is I keep hoping that human beings can rethink what they're doing. I would like the mayor to come down and meet with some people in the Battery and talk over, what's happening. I'd like to think a city this size doesn't have to handle things by sneakiness and force and disrespectful, discourteous interactions. There's got to be a better way.
Well, let us know what happens, Ms. Adler. We'll leave it there for today.
All right, thanks.
That is Judy Adler. She lives in the Battery on the outer edge of St. John's. You got any thoughts on what she had to say? If you're the mayor and you're planning on going to the Battery, you can call and let us know. We'll pass the word along. 576-5207 is the number to call for Talkback. If you'd like to send an email, the address is on the go at cbc.ca.